Hello, and welcome to the Raised Beaches podcast, a podcast about paleoclimate, earth sciences, and global change. I'm Dr. Evan James Gowan, but you can call me Evan. This is episode 5 of the Raised Beaches podcast, and I'm recording on March 6, 2025. This episode's deep dive will be on the greenhouse effect. Since the last episode, I have two publications. One of them I'll be discussing in the paper section, and it's led by Alessio Rovera, and it's on some of the work that we did in Argentina in 2019. The second paper is more related to the work that I've been doing in Kumamoto on studying past climate in Eastern Asia and Japan. And this paper only came out about a week ago, and I want to do something more elaborate for that. So I won't be discussing it in this issue, but if you're interested, you can find that in the links in the show notes. So yeah, it's been 2 months, and I had hoped to have an episode out a little bit sooner than this, but I've been very busy. One thing that's happened is I've started to teach English, and I live in Japan, and probably the most common profession for a native English speaker in Japan who is unable to fluently speak Japanese is English teacher. And I'm an academic researcher, so I've kind of resisted the idea of teaching English for a long time because I still really wanted to get a research position, but I can't be unemployed forever. So I decided, well, I better start teaching English. And I actually have found that teaching English and teaching in general is very enjoyable, and perhaps I shouldn't have waited so long. But anyway, next month I'm going to be starting teaching at a part-time basis in a couple of institutions in Kumamoto. So I'm looking forward to that, and because this is kind of at a university level, I get to have quite a bit of control over what I'm going to teach, and of course I'm going to have at least some focus on climate change related issues and environmental issues. So it should be fun. In the past 2 months, in terms of geological things that I've experienced during the New Year's break, I was kind of by myself, and I'm like, oh, what am I going to do? And just before Christmas, I heard, Sakurajima, the volcano in southern Kyushu, had a fairly big eruption. And I'm like, well, I don't have anything else to do. So I'll go to Kagoshima and go visit Sakurajima volcano and hope that it erupts while I'm there. And so I went there, and yeah, it erupted twice when I was there. The weather was absolutely beautiful, very clear skies. You can, if you're watching the video version of this, you'll see a video that I took of the volcano erupting. And yeah, it's always fun to go to Sakurajima volcano. And yeah, the volcano is located in this giant caldera that was formed in an eruption during the last glacial maximum, very start of the last glacial maximum. So there's some interesting possible links to climate there, but I don't think that's been explored fully because I think there's still some uncertainty on the exact age. But anyway, the other exciting geological thing that happened was that on January 13th, there was a fairly large earthquake in Kyushu. It's a magnitude 6.8, and it didn't actually cause any major damage or even minor damage for that matter. And it's on the other side of the island from Kumamoto, so even if it was a damaging earthquake, it probably wouldn't have done too much in Kumamoto. But anyway, the reason it wasn't damaging was that it was a subduction zone earthquake, and it was at a depth of 40 kilometers. So, and it was a bit offshore. So, by the time the waves got to a populated area, the strength of the waves from the earthquake were already attenuated to a certain extent. So there was definitely some shaking, and it shook for about 20 seconds here. And get the alert on your phone like earthquake, take cover, and it's like I've experienced enough earthquakes to know that if you're hearing that emergency warning, you're probably far enough away that there's not going to be any damage where you are. But yeah, it's still a good idea to take cover. And yeah, I remember when the big earthquakes in Kumamoto happened in 2016, the shaking had already pretty much stopped by the time we got the warning. So it's good to have the warning, but yeah, if you are if you're close enough, the warning will come after you start feeling the earthquake. Yeah, and the only casualty on my shelf, there's a Yoshi sitting there, and he fell down. But I haven't fixed his position yet. But if you're watching the video here, it's just behind me. Yeah, there's earthquakes that happen all the time in Kumamoto, and yeah, you feel them. Like there was one a few days or a couple of weeks ago, and it's like I was like sitting on the toilet, and then things are shaking, and I'm like, oh, it's very unsettling when that happens at that time. But yeah, not the first time that has happened to me actually. So yeah, I'd say in Kumamoto you feel an earthquake maybe on average once a month, but most of them are pretty small. If you're not used to it, it could be unsettling, but it's a constant reminder of the risks that exist here, and we always make sure to have a supply of water just in case. So one of the things that kept me occupied in the past 2 months is that I wrote a script to download the sediment core data from the NCEI, the data center for the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA. And I talked about this in episode 3, that the NCI has all this data and for climate related stuff. And at that time, I was concerned about the safety of that data. And yeah, in early February, I decided, well, I better write this and get this data because I might use this data for my own research. And yeah, so in the election campaign last year in the United States, Donald Trump himself didn't really have a campaign platform, but there was this manifesto called Project 2025. And basically, the people behind Donald Trump's campaign were sort of behind this Project 2025. So you can interpret that as being what Donald Trump's platform was in the election. And these people are a bunch of climate change deniers. And if you read the section on NOAA, which is quite extensive, they say, oh, well, the Office of Oceanic and Atmospheric Research are, they provide theoretical science, and they say, oh, this is the source of much of NOAA's climate alarmism. So these people who wrote this are very big climate change deniers. And basically in this document, they said, we're going to basically dismantle NOAA and really change how it works and try to, privatize what we can and dismantle what we don't like. And anyway, the thing that really got me started on writing the script to download the data was on February 5th when Doge entered NOAA's headquarters. And that's when it became very clear that this Project 2025 manifesto, what they said in it is going to happen. And yeah, I said I'm not going to risk having this data that I might need to disappear. So I spent about a week writing this script, and I wanted to make sure everything was organized in a way that I wanted it in. So it's kind of curated to a certain degree. And anyway, it's not looking good for NOAA right now. I don't know if there's anything that can stop the cuts that are happening. Like they said they're going to sell off the buildings that house a lot of the places where they do the climate change research. So, unless something happens to stop them, it's going to be a major blow on climate change research around the world. And the next thing that was a big target of Doge is the National Science Foundation, or NSF, and they are making a big mess of it. They're basically freezing or cutting research funding for a lot of the basic research that is being done in the United States. And the NSF funds a lot of the major climate-related projects that are being done by the U.S. For instance, they fund a lot of the research vessels. They fund the Antarctic and Arctic bases. And the first thing they did was they just fired all these probationary workers. And of course, the reason they did that is because a lot of people, when they hear the word probationary workers, they think that these workers must have done something wrong, and that if they do something wrong again, they should be fired. But that's not what's happened. Like, these are basically people who are just starting their jobs or have been promoted to a new position, and the probation period is basically to check if they are capable of doing their jobs as they're expected. So it's a way to promote basically accountability in the government. And yeah, that's been quite devastating, because a lot of the people who are managers were probationary workers, and they were let go. And another thing that happened was the United States Geological Survey. They basically froze their expenses budget, and I saw a tweet, or not a tweet, but a Bluesky equivalent of a tweet that showed the USGS booth at this major mining conference in Toronto, and it just had the booth and said, "Oh, we'll be here next year." And basically what happened is that the USGS was unable to send people to go to the biggest mining convention in the world. And the USGS does a lot of the basic research that makes mining possible. So it's just really crazy if they're talking about, like, these rare earth minerals and how we need to find them, and then they basically cut the organization in the government that is responsible for finding where these minerals could be. Whereas for my own work, I use two models that are funded by the U.S. government. One is the parallel ice sheet model, and that's been funded by grants from NASA and the NSF. And the other is CESM, the Community Earth System model, and that's in the paper that I published last week. I used this climate model, and yeah, that's also funded by the NSF. And basically, these projects, the funding is probably going to stop, and the CESM is probably the most used climate model, so it'll be a massive blow to the climate research community if there's no longer any funding to continue its development. So, we'll see what happens in the next couple of months, but things are not looking good as of March 6th, so we'll see. Um, the next thing, the final thing in this intro that I'm going to talk about is DEI. So DEI stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And this is kind of an American-led movement, but it has relevance all around the world, at least in democratic countries. And one thing after Trump got elected is that some organizations, some societies, universities, they basically started to scrub their DEI policies off their websites. And they did so because the government is targeting anything that is DEI. And so they're kind of scared of getting targeted. But, I think this is kind of folly because of what DEI actually is. So why is DEI necessary? And the thing that you should really understand is that without DEI, a merit-based system of advancement in society is not possible. And DEI is necessary to make sure that entrenched groups are not able to prevent, people who deserve to go up in rank from getting to that rank. And so like an aristocracy or a gilded class, they will do everything they can to preserve their status and basically create a system of nepotism to promote their family and friends. And without DEI initiatives, you can't have a democracy. Like people at the bottom will not have a proper say, and they won't be able to rise up. And I'm an academic scientist, so it's best to give an example of that from that perspective. You know, academic science prior to World War II was primarily done as a gentleman's pursuit. It was done by people who were from well-off families or had good connections that allowed them to get funded from wealthy patrons or whatever. And if you look at all the prominent scientists from before 1950 or so, most of them had connections with the upper class. As an example, Charles Darwin, I always talk about him because he was a great scientist who wrote a lot of the fundamental papers on the topics that I research. The reason he was able to become a great scientist was because his father was a very wealthy person who was able to bankroll everything that he did. Like the voyage of the Beagle, which was 5 years, Charles Darwin's expenses were covered by his father. And then after he got back, Darwin had a lot of fame, so his father actually gave him a stipend so that he wouldn't have to work a regular job. And yeah, after Darwin's father died, he got a big inheritance. So yeah, Darwin would not have been able to get to where he was if his family was not wealthy. And I already talked about this in the first episode in the famous conflict between Maria Graham and George Greenough, that women were not allowed to participate in 19th century science, at least not in a meaningful sense. And there were a lot of people that really tried to kick down any woman who would had the gall of actually doing research science. So prior to the 1950s or so, that's sort of the system that was in place. The people who were at the top really wanted to make science an exclusive club for people in the upper class. What changed all of that was World War II. So there was a need to develop weapons so that the countries could fight the wars and win them. And one of the first major government-led science projects was the Manhattan Project. You know, that was maybe not the best thing for anybody that to develop nuclear weapons, but it the Manhattan Project really demonstrated that a government-funded project could very rapidly advance science in a short period of time. And as a result of the competition during the Cold War, after World War II, government-led science really became the main way that science was funded. So private funding for science almost completely disappeared, at least for things that were not commercially viable. And this worked out quite well. We found out a lot of things from 1950 to now because of government funded research. And you can say that you could say that government funding of science was a DEI maneuver. So it allowed new people to enter science, and that there could be a merit-based system of advancement. So now, instead of people doing science based on how they could get funding from their families or from patrons, they could apply for funding and say, I want to do this project, and here's what I think the results will be. So it was basically possible for excellent projects to be funded regardless of who you are. And I know in reality, this is not exactly how things go, because even with government funding, there are still biases in the system. But there are women now who can do science, which was not the case in the 19th century. There are people from previously disadvantaged backgrounds that can make it now. And this is only possible because of the government funding of science, and that a merit-based system could exist. So, in getting rid of DEI, the end goal is to return to a upper class led society where it's almost impossible for people to advance unless they have good connections. And I can understand why some of the initiatives with DI were looked unfavorably by people, like having particular quotas for a certain amount of people from different groups can be seen as not actually being merit-based, which, sure, maybe that's a little bit, but maybe a top-down DI initiative is not the way to go. Maybe a more bottom-up approach is better, like, having a system in place where all schools are free and have equal levels of education quality, and having children that are well fed and are not starving. That could be the best DEI policy. And getting into university, having that being based purely on scholastic achievement rather than how much debt you can take on. That's also sort of a way to have DEI. So anyway, I lived in Sweden for a while, and that's kind of the system they had in place. Like, it was possible to go up and do whatever you want. Like, you were not restricted based on who your parents were or where you're from or anything. It's also not a perfect system in Sweden, don't get me wrong, but it does work to, it does work to make a more equitable society if you have equal education opportunities. So anyway, that's it for the introduction.